Vera Sproule was born north of Bigger, Saskatchewan in 1931 to Russian immigrants John and Annie Sproule. In the early 1900s, with political unrest in Russia, the local priest encouraged Vera's grandfather and his brother to emigrate to a land called Canada. The brother and his wife backed out, and their futures turned bleak as they suffered the First and Second World Wars. But Vera's grandfather saved his family and was spared the tragedy of war. In 1930, Vera's parents moved to the Levain district northeast of Bigger. Little Vera grew up in a tiny three-room house that sat atop a hill. The 1930s brought in the Great Depression, and it was in this era, with howling windstorms, that Vera's siblings began to arrive one by one. The Sproule children were children of the dust. The firstborn died at birth in 1927. Then came Eva, Jack, Vera, Edna, Lorene, and Edward. But in the midst of their poverty, they were loved and provided for. They always had enough to eat. Money was scarce.
I don't remember wearing any hand-me-downs. There were no hand-me-downs to hand me down. The philosophy of the time was do without, make it do, or wear it out.
I like going to school. I like better going to school than working on the farm.
And Vera, she'd always sleep in. And we had so many cows to milk, and she'd come around the corner and she'd say, "Are they all done?" And so Mother made her in charge of making sandwiches for school lunches, didn't she?
Mm-hmm. I was in charge of the lunches.
And now we got to kind of get a giggle with her having bed and breakfast. We say, "Did you believe Vera's going to be such a worker?" Because she used to hide from cows.
I hated cows. I hated all that dirty work. I like to work with Mom, baking cakes and helping her
cleaning the house.
Yeah,
cleaning the house.
I hated sticking my fingers into the calves' mouths, you know, and then in the pail, like, so that they would drink the milk, and I hated all that. The community was all Russian or Ukrainian, a few English families. We had a three-roomed house. We had no sitting rooms, so we did all our work around the kitchen table. And then we had another little room where Mother and Father were. Then Mother and Father took in a girl who was pregnant, and they took her in, and so Mother and Father moved into our bedroom. So there were 8 of us.
She was our hired girl.
She was our hired girl, and she had a place to stay while she awaited the birth of her baby. So 8 of us all slept in the bed, and we slept 3 in the bed as long as I can remember. We had a reputation. It was...
Well, do you remember there was a carload of boys came, we never saw them in our lives, and they said there was good-looking girls in the hills. They rode around till they found.
And Mother said, "How do they find us in these hills? And who are..." And Dad came and says, "Who are they?" Mom says, "I don't know. How do they find us?" And Dad just walked around like a policeman. And he wasn't ready to let any of us go off with anybody at all. He was pretty strict. I was about 4 years old when I came in the house, and I remember this excitement. And there was a baby. And I said, "Where did this baby come from?" And somebody said that Baba Zinko, who was the midwife, she was coming across the fields, and she found Lorene and the baby in the bushes. So ever after that, I always looked in the bushes for the baby, because I thought the coyotes could have gotten her. And I told my mother years later, you know what I was told, and she says, "Who told you that?" I said, "Somebody in the house, I don't know who it was." She said, "Poor child, you know, walking around looking in the little coulees to see if there's a baby in there."
And then the only highlight we had was going to our grandmother's in the wintertime in the sleigh, and everybody had big blankets around them. And my mother felt that, where do you go to visit with 6 kids but your own mother, you know?
Her mother was, she always had a headache when we came. Grandpa and Grandma used to sit by the big table and pour tea. They had big cups and big saucers, and they'd pour the tea in the saucers and they'd put their elbows on the table. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
and they drank their tea out of the saucer. And I remember it was so comfortable looking, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The way they'd sip that tea. And Grandpa was a bearded man like Winston, and I don't ever remember him not having a white beard, and neither does our mother. And he was a very stately, quiet man. Grandma was more feisty.
Then the Solonic family, we never saw them too much, but Grandpa Solonic came over in the wintertime because he made sausage, and he brought us a whole lot of sausage. You remember when he told you to wash his hanky? He had a cold.
Oh, I took it by the ends like
and
this.
He had such a cold.
And I was dipping it in the water.
And he
like
says, Vera, Vera.
Yeah, Mnuchka, that's the granddaughter. I took it by the edges and I was just dipping it in, and then I hung it up, and it dried stiff like it was starched. And I gave it to him. And he was kissing me. Oh, my granddaughter. Oh, spasiba, spasiba. Thank you, thank you. Ooh, ooh. We woke up in the morning and we had to milk the cows.
In the morning, the cow had a bell on her, and when we heard that bell coming closer and
I
closer,
never heard it.
it was time to get up. And Mom would holler and knock on the window, and everybody had to be down. We
Vera.
had 2 cows each to milk. Lorene was delicate. She was sickly when she was young, so she had to gather the eggs and pick kindling in the evenings. Vera usually made lunches.
We played Monopoly. We had
An awful lot of Monopoly in the wintertime.
And when she had enough of our shenanigans in that little house, she'd say, "Put on your parkas and coats and get outside." She'd chase us outside, wouldn't she? So we'd get out on the hill.
Then Dad decided, he remembered that the Russians used to make this little,
Havnячок.
yeah, it was out of cow pie, soft cow pie. And he made it like a flying saucer. And it was winter time, so he put a rope through it. And if the rope froze in, that we could pull it. And it was like a flying saucer. He put a little bit of
Water over it, that it froze.
and then he put straw in it. And then when we went downstairs, we went round and round and round.
Downhill.
And I was always afraid not to run into the fence because, you're dizzy by the time you get to the bottom.
And talk about a heavy little thing.
Oh, it was heavy.
So heavy. We were all pulling it up the hill just
then-
for that
And
ride.
then when spring came and it got hot one day and we came home and the little Havnячок was melted.
One big cow pie,
One big cow
about 3 feet wide, like a big donut. That was the end of our flying saucer.